low and go north.
His loss means fewer laughs for most of us, but Tim Winter of Parents Television Council says he'll be missed for the very serious and heartfelt work he did as an advisory board member for the PTC.
He came to the Parents Television Council after being introduced to us through his good friend Steve Allen, who was the co-founder of the Parents Television Council.
He says Conway was as funny as any comedian of his era, but he did it the hard way.
It's easy to be explicit. It's hard to be funny and clean. But he was committed to doing just that.
But Winter says what he'll miss most about Tim Conway was his genuine love of life.
And I can tell you that he in his personal life embodied that very same happy, positive, wholesome type of personality that we all know through the television.
Tim Conway was 85. I'm Steve Jordahl.
Ever received a call like this?
An enforcement action executed by the U.S. Treasury, intending your serious attention.
U.S. regulators are proposing new tools to counter the unrelenting waves of robocalls received each year in America. The rising volume of calls in the last few years has created pressure on Congress, regulators, and phone companies to act. The FCC said it will vote in June whether to allow carriers to block spam calls by default. For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
J. Warner Wallace.
I think we're blessed as Christians that we don't believe something that's not rooted in history. We believe something that had to actually occur. As Paul said, if the resurrection didn't actually occur in history, we're to be pitied. And that's the beautiful thing about Christianity, is it's something you can actually investigate. I'm grateful for that, because as an investigator, that's exactly how I came to faith.
The Marriage, Family, and Life Conference is coming June 20th through 22nd. Learn more and register at urbanfamilytalk.com. She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
The Green New Deal that's a hoax like the hoax I just went through. I'm not even sure. It might be a bigger one, and mine was pretty big.
If you're accused of a crime by a grand jury and they don't indict you, the prosecutor doesn't go all over town saying, we thought he did this, we thought he did this. This is all the evidence. That's why a grand jury is secret.
And now, Stacy Washington.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to the program, and thanks for being with us today. We have so much for you. We actually have two guests this hour of the program, Dr. Alex McFarland and Timothy Snowball, who is he's an attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation, and they have some interesting information about socialism. Dr. Alex McFarland, who's host of Exploring the Word here on American Family Radio, is going to join us to talk about the Equality Act and exactly what that means for us as believers. What kind of ramifications will that have on us? And I know for people who are maybe unaware of what the Equality Act is, it's intentionally named so that it sounds like it's a great idea. And then it isn't, right? It's not a good idea. It's actually a horrible idea. So we'll talk about that. We will also get into this Green New Deal. The president had some interesting comments on it. In fact, let's go to that right now. It's President Trump talking about how the Green New Deal is actually a hoax.
The Green New Deal that's a hoax like the hoax I just went through. I'm not even sure. It might be a bigger one, and mine was pretty big. Mine was unlimited. Think of it, the Green New Deal. Under that deal, I didn't have this. This isn't down. But John Kennedy, Bill, under that deal, everybody in this room gets fired. All of the thousands of guys and women standing on these buildings get fired. They go home. Because under the Green New Deal, they don't like clean, beautiful natural gas. They don't like anything. They don't know what they like. They sort of like wind, even though it kills all the birds. You want to see a bird cemetery? Go under a windmill sometime. You'll see the saddest. You got every type of bird. You know, in California, you go to jail for 5 years if you kill a bald eagle. You go under a windmill, you see them all over the place. Not a good situation. But that's what they were counting on, wind. And when the wind doesn't blow, you don't watch television that night.
Yeah, so when the wind doesn't blow, you don't watch television that night because you don't have any electricity. And what President Trump is saying there, the point he's making is that when people are talking about the Green New Deal and all the things that go along with it, they're not telling you the truth about what that looks like for your everyday living. They're not letting you know how intermittent your service would be. And so if you think it's annoying to go to your favorite restaurant, like, you know, the big legendary, they're not available. The biggest joke on the internet anywhere is that if you go to McDonald's right now, if it's hot where you are, it's pretty warm here today. If you go to McDonald's, there's more than a 50% chance that any McDonald's you go to, the ice cream machine is broken. And a lot of people in the summer, the only reason they're going to McDonald's is so they can get that soft serve ice cream in a cone for everybody in the car, everybody in the minivan, everybody in the truck, whatever. And so that's the big joke. Well, if you think people get annoyed about that, not being able to get soft serve ice cream, imagine having everything run by wind power like the Democrats want us to do. And when you go to flip a switch and there's no wind out, because that happens. Have you ever noticed? You go outside and it's eerily quiet. You're like, what is missing? Well, the wind isn't blowing. And what I notice is that when when it's eerily quiet outside and the wind isn't blowing, oftentimes I'll notice that the birds aren't chirping either. It's almost as if the birds have stopped chirping so they can listen to the fact that there's no wind blowing. Now, that's something interesting for us to discuss, isn't it? It's fun to talk about that. I mean, it doesn't hurt anybody for me to talk about wind not blowing and birds not chirping or what have you. But it's a whole nother story if you've got, let's say, a radio show to broadcast, or you need to vacuum, or God forbid it's 95, there's no wind, you can't turn on your air conditioner. And when I say turn on, remember most of the things that we use that run off of electricity they're automatic type things. Like you don't actually cut your air conditioning on. It turns on when it senses that the temperature that you've set, 68, 72, whatever, the temperature drops below that or goes above that for the AC, and it clicks on. So you're sitting at home waiting for stuff to click on. And not only is that not clicking on, but think about all the lights and things you use all day long without a second thought. You just access it. Your expectation is that whenever you hit the switch, you're going to get electricity. You're going to press the button on the blender and it's going to go. If you plug something in, when you hit the on switch, you're going to turn on a fan, you're going to turn on a light, you're going to turn on a television. And these are necessities for people who are living their lives where you have to have a dialysis machine or you need the nebulizer. Let's say if you have asthma, you don't have time for wind to blow. You want access to electricity and you want it now. Democrats are actually proposing that we roll back all of the technological innovation that makes it easy to live and put ourselves in a position where we're at the mercy of whatever the weather can do. And it's not just unacceptable. It's silly to expect Americans to live like that. I mean, why would we want to? And so for the teenagers and young people who are currently like, oh, the Green New Deal, yay, the Green New Deal, that sounds awesome. Well, of course, they're going to be in favor of it because they're not thinking it through. That's when the adults move into the equation. Us adults, there's supposed to be enough of us clear thinking to offset anything that teenagers and college students might think is a good idea. Remember, voter turnout for college students is really low anyway, because most college students, whenever they send campus reform or anybody onto the college campus and they say, hey, when's the last time you voted? Are you 18? Sometimes they'll catch 21-year-olds and they're just walking with their earbuds in. They got their backpacks on. And when they talk to them, they almost always say identical. I'm just worried about getting these classes, man. I'm just worried about making my tests. They're focused on finishing their education. And then for young adults in the workforce, they're just getting their feet wet. And so it's almost a benefit that voter turnout is kind of low in those groups. Why? Because if you're not paying attention to the political processes, then you're probably not well equipped to participate in them. So you may be of the age where you can vote, but what about being informed? So this is something that it keeps coming up. We need the Green New Deal. We need to stop climate change. We need to single-handedly, unilaterally adjust the climate. People who believe that you can do that, but they say us Christians are small-minded and believe in fairy tales. Us believing in God and believing that he's the creator of the heaven and the earth and everything that we see, us believing that he's real and that we can have a relationship with him, that's more far-fetched than rebuilding every building in America never ever flying an airplane again, and using only wind and solar power, which have been proven to be unreliable to heat and cool 325 million Americans, plus the 30 or 40 million illegal aliens that are here. So which of those sounds more implausible to you? And I know there are plenty of people out there who are big builders, developers, like, Donald Trump's not the only one out there who knows the art of the deal. He wrote the book, but there are plenty of developers out there who've made amazing, buildings and structures, et cetera, et cetera. But what's interesting is that none of them have jumped on board to say, hey, this looks like an opportunity for us to make a whole lot of money. Let's rebuild every building in America. Nobody's interested in doing that. Not only the architectural significance that would be lost because some of our buildings are historic and they're old, but it's just the idea that what we have now isn't good enough. We need to remake the entire country. But when we say we want to remake our lives and follow Jesus Christ as his disciples, and we want to, we know we're formed in the image of God. Now that's outlandish and crazy, right? And that's what I'm talking about. Denying God, denying the truth of the cross. But, hey, let's rebuild every building. Let's measure, the flatulence of cows and govern ourselves according to that. That's the kind of lunacy that we're working with right now. So pardon me if I'm not in favor of it. All right. Now, this story, okay. I have two more stories for you for just this segment. First off, I keep giving this one out and I have not talked about it yet. So first, let's do research reveals belonging to a church is a crucial element for longer and happier lives. So this one, I think it's fascinating because Timothy P. Carney, he's the author of Alienated America, Why Some Places Thrive While Others Collapse. He writes about what he's discovered in a recent editorial for the New York Post. So he's talking about Sioux County, Iowa, which is the example. The county is known for its strong Christian presence in the state. The Association of Religious Data Archives states that the county has the highest portion of evangelicals and mainline Protestants in the entire state of Iowa. So the Association of Religious Data Archives actually has this information that he used to research, and it reveals that the county rates low in problems such as drug overdoses. On the other hand, Carney highlights how areas such as Pottawatomie County, Iowa's least religious county, have the highest rates in the state for violent crimes, overdoses, and disability claims. So Carney's research, and he used a number of different sources, Deseret News, BYU, etc. He reports that families attending church at least once a week are very happy and are far more likely to eat dinner together and participate in family activities. The increased family time results in a healthier household. So belonging to a church is a crucial element of living a good, happy, healthy life. And the phenomenon of the church attendance and the ensuing happy life actually resonates and ripples outward to other individuals in the community. So places like Sioux Center, Salt Lake City, they're full of vibrant churches, and they're places with more upward mobility, more marriage, more family formation. So the key is churches that deliberately and unceasingly try to build communities and become institutions of civil society, not merely places of worship, teaching their followers to live out their faith by serving their neighbors. They also provide, through this work, this safety net and sense of purpose that only tight-knit communities can provide. So it's not just about the individuals who are choosing and making it a practice to attend church, but it's everything that flows out from that practice, from going into these churches on a regular basis, participating in the outreach ministries, and helping through service and participation to guide that outlook so that the church is community focused, bringing the gospel out into the community and making it real in the lives of everyone nearby. So it's a benefit for everyone. Timothy B. Carney actually wrote a book called Alienated America, Why Some Places Thrive While Others Collapse. And I think this is pretty fascinating. Statistics have pretty much proven this before. Pew Research shares that overall church attendance has been on the decline, and only 36% of Americans are attending weekly services in 2014. The number is a 14% decline from 1950's Gallup report. Now, CBN recently reported on the nun rising movement. Nuns are people who identify as having no religious affiliation. And many of them believe there's a God, but they've lost the desire to be affiliated with a religion And this mindset actually reflects the lifestyles of many millennials. Over 59% have already left the church. And so when we get Alex on, Dr. Alex McFarland, host of Exploring the Word, he's going to be with us next segment. And we're going to kind of touch on this and also this push for the Equality Act, because I think, you know, you can see a correlation between declining church attendance and the increase in the desire to force government, to force people to do stuff they don't want to do. That kind of totalitarianism comes from, you don't believe in freedom. You don't believe that freedom is an innate right. You believe that the government should force people to do stuff that's for the better good, stuff that's right, make them think things, make them believe things. And that all rises out of people getting away from this idea that we're all created in the image of God. We're individuals and we have individual rights and liberties. The government's there to protect those rights and liberties, not to force us to do things that we may or may not want to do for whatever reason. So Carney also believes this, what I just articulated there. He said, shrinking church attendance in the U.S. is clearly connected to societal problems. And as politicians and social leaders try to pinpoint the root cause of American woe, they should start by looking at America's closing churches and then compare those to the churches that are bustling and on the increase and the communities that surround both, and compare them and see what does this show to us? What do we learn from this? I think it's fascinating research. We will talk about the guy who's charged with flying his helicopter in and out of his backyard for months. In other words, he was using his helicopter as his personal conveyance, like a car. And his neighbors got mad and complained, and now he's up and he's in trouble. And I just want to know how I can live that best life. Well, first I have to learn how to fly a helicopter. Be right back.
Here's American Family Association President Tim Wildman.
Lynn Ingram and Jim Duncan, two Texans, support and believe in our ministry here at AFA and AFR.
We know more about the laundry business than anything else. We know a little bit about a lot of things, but we know a lot about the laundry and dry cleaning business.
They created a laundry detergent to sell to folks to support AFA.
We just want to be able to provide a product that can be used by AFA to support the ministry.
When you wash your family's clothes with Redeem Clean laundry detergent, you can take great satisfaction in knowing that you're supporting the vital work of the American Family Association. It's a unique way to increase your giving to AFA. For clean laundry and support of a cleaner society, it's Redeem Clean. Learn more about the Redeem Clean products when you visit redeemclean.afastore.net.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with A Legacy Moment. The other evening on the news, there was a story about some people who claim to be handymen, who do everything from roofing to paving driveways. Unfortunately, they're rip-off artists. You know, slick con men who prey on the unsuspecting. Not everybody who sounds sincere is sincere. Some of us are just too trusting. We need to be careful who we let get close to us. Others of us are manipulators by nature. We say some things and withhold other information to make sure we control the outcome and get others to do what we want them to do. In 2 Samuel chapter 15, David's own son Absalom begins to manipulate and orchestrate the overthrow of his father. We pick up the story in verse 1. Now it came about after this that Absalom provided for himself a chariot and horses and 50 men as runners before him. Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. Now verse 4. Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that one would appoint me judge in the land. Then every man who has any suit or cause could come to me, and I would give him justice." Then verse 6 says, "And in this manner Absalom dealt with all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole away the hearts of the men of Israel." That was his real motivation. He stole their hearts away. Absalom had an agenda, and he sounded as if he had noble motives. I want to be a fair judge. But he stole their loyalty. Basically, he was disloyal, and he kept his true desires secret. Well, here's what I want you to remember today. Not everybody around us is honest. Trust is a precious gift. The best you can, make sure that the heart and motives are right before you give the gift of trust.
Legacy Moment is a production of Moody Radio.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Hey there, welcome back to the program. I'm Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. It's my pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He's a fan favorite. He's a host on American Family Radio of Exploring the Word. He's a doctor, holds a doctorate, PhD, and he's an overall fantastic individual who he traverses the country, traveling most days out of the year and hosting conferences and giving speeches on apologetics and activating the youth of America for the cause of Jesus Christ. So it's an awesome privilege to have Dr. Alex McFarland join us again today. Hey, Dr. Alex, how you doing?
Stacy, you're so kind. Thank you for that very generous and undeserved introduction.
It's the truth. I only tell the truth about the guests coming on, so it's the truth. So where are you calling in from today?
Who's excited about Jesus?
Well, amen to that. So where are you calling in from today? What part of the country are you in?
I am on Interstate 85 outside of Charlotte, North Carolina.
So you guys have an event coming up, don't you?
Yeah, I've got my show Exploring the Word that is on the AFR network in about 36 minutes. Mm-hmm. So I'm just driving my little car to the studio.
Okay. All right, because I wasn't sure if you were out traveling and speaking.
Are you home in your home studio?
I am. I'm back at home, and gratefully so, because, Monday we were discussing this. So to let everyone in, Dr. McFarland and I, when we were at Share-a-thon, we worked the phones together and kind of caught up a little bit. And I was sharing with him that our son Miles is graduating on May the 20th, which is Monday. So I've got family incoming. So we're fluffing all the pillows and cleaning up and, making everything look nice for incoming family and then the graduation.
Well, I was going to tell everybody, when we did Share-a-thon together, well, first of all, we were in Anaheim, California at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. And then at AFA, we were doing Share-a-thon, and I was like, we should do a show. I mean, we had like on-air chemistry, and we were going through current events and things, and I was like, I like the way you think.
Yeah, we do. We actually had we didn't get to do as much together at NRB, but at the Share-a-thon, because we were like, all of the hosts were together, and so I got to do, like, of course, bucket list. I got to be on with Brian Fisher of Focal Point, and in the studio with him, which I'd never done before. I'd never even met Brian before. And then I also got to interview Abe on his own show. So I was actually in the studio where he normally is. And we were there live and interviewed him during his hour. And then you and I we just did a bunch of shows together during my hour where you were on with me, and we were able to just hang out and have a good time. So we were killing it when we were doing our radio stuff. It was awesome.
It was funny because during, the fundraising for some of the radio, sometimes people are like, please help us and say a little prayer. And if you think about it, maybe send us something. And Stacy was on there, and Stacy was like, look, people, America's going to hell on a banana peel. And y'all better man up and support. And it was. I mean, people responded, and we give God the glory.
Yeah, but, and you were also right there. You were like, and so we just need to say a prayer right now. And people were moved by that. Like, it was a good dynamic that we had where it is nicer. You have to admit, it's nicer when you get to do radio together. Like, if you're in the room with a person, it is really fun. And then afterwards, I think the rapport increases because now we have actually done, because you've been on my program before, we've talked before, we've met before, but this was different because we actually got to do some radio together, live radio, which was super fun.
Well, exactly. And, the passion in our words is because, all kidding aside, I mean, the country, I love this nation, I love Jesus. Hey, I'm a happy camper. I'm saved. I've got a great wife, and I love this nation. But in all seriousness, I mean, this country is in a bad place. And we've got to have a great move of God's Holy Spirit, and we need to see masses come to Jesus. And we need a moral awakening. Stacy, do you know what I mean when I say we need a moral awakening?
I do.
This country really can't survive.
Well, and that's a perfect segue. Alex, I would really wanted to get your take on the Equality Act. So, they've got this bill that they proposed and they want to pass it and get it through. Obviously, it'll sail through the House because the Democrats control the House, but then it could be blocked in the Senate, which is where we hope it would be. And if it wasn't, obviously the president could simply veto it. But the Equality Act, it has such a nice name, but in reality, it's about squashing religious freedom and fully silencing people who have a religious core, people who are practicing Christians, who run Christian businesses, or who work in places where they just simply want to be left alone to, exercise our faith under the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, what's basically promised to us through our government. And I'm really, I can't believe how far this thing has gone, but it is actually a live bill. Yeah. What is your take on that? Like, how do we fight that?
Well, I got to tell you, you have to hand it to Satan. Over the last 45 years, the subtle, incremental mainstreaming of homosexuality and transgenderism has resulted, and folks, listen to me, this is not theory, this is fact. We're looking at the criminalization of Christianity. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. Christianity is good news, that the Son of God gave his life on the cross so that we could be saved. But Christianity contains the truth that we are sinners and we have to repent and turn away from sin. Mm-hmm. And now the church has been called to proclaim the gospel to everybody. God loves you, Christ died for you, repent of your sin, and you can be saved. Well, you're right. Equality sounds really great. Mm-hmm. Hey, we should be tolerant and everybody should be viewed as equal. But the Equality Act, as it relates to granting the same human rights, constitutional rights to gay, lesbian, bi, queer, transgender, I mean, here's what is unique about it and what the danger is. For one thing, folks, this will be the first time that the law has always talked about what are mutable and immutable characteristics. The fact that I'm a male, that is an immutable characteristic. You're a female. Can't change that.
Nope.
But mutable, changeable characteristics are behaviors. And so I've met many, many ex-homosexuals, ex-transgenders, but you'll never meet an ex-Hispanic or an ex-Caucasian. And so really we're not going to be able to legally tell sinners they need to be saved. And the Great Commission mandate of our Lord.
So, okay, you packed a lot in there, and I appreciate your analysis because I'm really concerned that maybe Americans, and this happens a lot, there'll be so much news that they won't focus in on something like the Equality Act, and it kind of, that's what the leftist agenda is all about. You bombard people with so much news, and then you can slide the most insidious proposals. They just kind of go by under the radar, and then before you know it, you're working someplace and you say, oh, we can't have someone who is gender confused in this role, but you could work here. And all of a sudden, you're trying to practice Christianity at work and that's not allowed because we passed the Gender Equality Act. And you're sitting there wondering, well, what just happened? And a lot of Americans, I think, the name of it makes it sound as if it's something, oh, I don't need to pay attention to that Equality Act. That's just more behavioral type stuff to get people to treat each other better. But it's not. This is it's the first real hammer that the liberals want to bring down on the heads of Christians who, honestly, it's just living as a Christian in America today would be severely altered by this bill.
Well, yeah, and just like abortion could only be legal if we ignore morality. If we suddenly decide it is okay to take the life of another human indiscriminately, murder, homosexuality is only valid if there is no natural law, the laws of nature, or self-evident truth, as Jefferson I mean, that you're right. People can do whatever they're going to do. But my point is, what we can't really allow people to do, or shouldn't allow people to do, is to do the things that will undermine the stability of the U.S. Constitution. And our abandonment of morality has undermined our freedom. You know, JFK in 1961, when John F. Kennedy was inaugurated as president, he said our first and most fundamental freedom, our basic, most foundational constitutional right, is the right to religious freedom. And so if you talk about morality, now listen carefully, folks, if you invoke morality and say, well, look, there are some things that are immoral, and we don't have to give state-sanctioned protection to things that are immoral, they say, well, you violated the First Amendment, which prohibits the establishment of religion. Here's my point, Stacy. Recognition of morality is not the same as the initiation of a religion. And we've become so desirous to position the First Amendment against public religion that what we've lost is really morality. And to the gays atheists, I say, look, if you want to be gay, if you want to be atheist, go for it. But what we can't let you do is abolish all recognition of morality such that our culture falls into lawlessness. And that's where we're at.
And I just, one of the things that sometimes I think about is, you know, in 20 years or so, we've passed the Equality Act. And in 20 years, because the Equality Act is opening the door to utter, unabated fascism, to religious persecution.
Exactly.
Right. So in 20 years, people will be saying, you know, what happened to all the churches, and why are we now, you know, imprisoning Christians? Where did this all begin? It began with the Equality Act. That's how important it is for us to refuse, because
exactly.
It's not something we can say, well, if we pass it, we can roll it back. Look at the fight we've had over trying to roll back Roe v. Wade. Look at the fight that we've been engaged in. And now we've taken to, obviously, we hope the Supreme Court would reverse itself and right that wrong. But now we're waging this war on the state level, and we're actually winning at the state level. We're really making some amazing changes. And God be the glory of that. He's the one who's orchestrating that and making those moves possible. But I'm pointing this out because once something becomes the law, it is so hard to reverse it. Look at Obamacare. Look at the control the Republicans had, and they weren't able to reverse that. And Obergefell, the same-sex marriage thing, that is not something that's going to be easy to reverse. Even if we find out something that incontrovertibly proves that homosexuality is not an innate characteristic and it's scientifically proven, it doesn't mean that Americans will say, well, we need to now take away this so-called right that the Supreme Court made up and basically redefine marriage. So stopping the Equality Act is the goal, not letting it come in and then saying, well, we'll just have to take it back later. There's no taking it back after we do something like that.
Oh my goodness! You could sooner outrun your shadow than you could roll back a law once it gets put on the books. And I would beg all Americans to defend morality like you would defend your next breath of oxygen. That's why, Stacy, whomever replaces Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and we need to pray about this. I wish her no ill.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I pray for her because she needs Jesus.
Amen.
But we need to pray that God would preside over the replacement of Ginsburg on the court, and that's why it's so imperative that I believe President Trump needs to, just as Gorsuch and Kavanaugh were natural law jurists, we need Ginsburg's replacement to be a jurist who believes in natural law. Because you're right, Stacy, we're going to be looking at the imprisonment of Christians, the criminalization of Christianity. If you want to see where America is going to be, just look at Europe, France, the Netherlands, and it's going to be a combination of secularism and Sharia.
Right.
And I will tell you, Stacy, and I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but the next 20 to 50 years are going to be an arm wrestling match over socialism and Sharia if America doesn't rediscover the gospel and have a moral revival.
And that's what we have to be praying for. You perfectly sum that up, because I think when especially since my show is kind of oriented around politics, and we talk about a lot of the things, that everyday issues that are going on, and politics is a tool. But if we are not girded up and really defenders of the faith ourselves, we can't even properly utilize the tool of politics. And so it all goes back to, are we rooted and grounded? Do we believe what the Bible says? And do we know that he says 1,000 will fall at your right hand, 10,000 will, God is very clear about what we're able to do if we dwell in the secret place and then profess his name. We tell the truth about who he is and we believe it. If we do those things, no man can assail us, and then we will be out there effectively evangelizing and bringing people to Christ, which is the way to change a lot of the way people are thinking. It seems kind of hopeless. When you talk politics to someone, you can't switch their mind. But if you tell them about the saving grace of Jesus Christ and they come to know him, he will set all things right with that person, because the truth cannot dwell with darkness. Lies can't stay in the light, right? So they need the light of Jesus Christ. You're fantastic. Your program, Exploring the Word, comes up here in just like 40 minutes. So I'm going to let you go and get ready for that. Thank you for joining us on the fly today. We really appreciate your time.
Well, and we have a summer youth apologetics camp we do every year. It's coming up in July. I mean, there's still time to register, and we talk to high schoolers and college kids about this and other issues. So my website, if I can give it, is truthforanewgeneration.com.
This is
Fantastic.
Uncommon
We'll be right
Moments.
back.
Here's former Super Bowl winning NFL coach Tony Dungy and his wife Lauren sharing from their book Uncommon Marriage.
In the mid-1990s, I started doubting that I'd ever get a head coaching position. Minnesota Vikings chaplain Tom Lamphere counseled me just to keep my eyes on Christ and be the best assistant coach I could. He told me to follow the Lord's guidance.
As Tony went into the 1995 season, he tried not to focus on his disappointment over 2 head coaching opportunities he didn't get. Instead, he got back to work with the goal of helping his team get to the Super Bowl.
Letdowns like these are why God gives us good wives. I needed Lauren to tell me that she loved me and believed in me, no matter what. Try to encourage your spouse today.
Tony and Lauren Dungy, authors of Uncommon Marriage, learning about lasting love and overcoming life's obstacles together. Discover more at CoachDungy.com.
Family is an institution set forth by God, one man and one woman for life, with the outflow being children produced by that union. It's obvious to all that there is an attack on the family in our country, and especially on fathers. Whether it's the cycle of sin that persists in our families or the pressure from our government to exclude men from being intimately involved, the strategic battle is on for the souls of men. Join us in the battle to strengthen fatherhood. UrbanFamilyTalk.com.
I love AFR. You say it's on the radio too?
Here at American Family Radio, we know that many people find their audio entertainment in other places than the radio. So our programming is available with the AFR app on Apple and Android devices, through Amazon Alexa, and now available on Roku.
I just love the podcasts.
That too. American Family Radio, streaming our podcast, now available wherever you are. And we're on the radio.
Foreign Dispatch.
Greenland is 3 times the size of Texas, but with just 56,000 people, this massive island is the least densely populated territory on Earth. This week, the State Department announced it's restoring a permanent American diplomatic presence in Greenland after 6 decades, and it's being seen as a bid to counter Chinese influence. As temperatures warm and ice melts, new shipping routes are opening up and natural resources are becoming available. And China, despite being hundreds of miles away, wants a piece of the action. At a meeting of the Arctic Council, a bloc of the 8 countries bordering the Arctic, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said China had no claim to the region. China quickly dismissed that warning. And at the end of the meeting, it was the US blocking a show of unity, the Arctic countries failing to agree a joint declaration when the US objected to language about climate change. In London, Simon Owen, Fox News.
You can download episodes of Stacy on the Right from the podcast page on AFR.net or UrbanFamilyTalk.com. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Hey there, welcome back to the program. Go to stacyontheright.com and subscribe. Also, don't forget that our Teespring is live. So that is pinned to the top of the Facebook page. If you don't have Facebook, the Teespring link will also be up at stacyontheright.com here momentarily. I'm still kind of editing that post, trying to figure out how to make it look nicer than it does. And the Teespring is where you can order a t-shirt, a mug, a cell phone case for your Samsung or iPhone. You can also order a sleeveless tank top, a sweatshirt. So click through to the link and you can order those things and they'll be shipped directly to you. So they don't come to me first and then you have to wait for me to mail it to you. You order it, you pay for it online, it comes directly to you, and it's Stacy on the Right Show merchandise, which has been requested. A lot of people have been saying, how do I get a t-shirt? How do I get a mug? It's not the Heritage mug. I'm sorry. That's from a different company. It's much harder to get, and it's way more expensive than the mug that you can get on the Teespring. So we're going to do a giveaway with a Heritage mug and another mug that I have. It's a Donald Trump mug. And that's all I'm going to tell you. You have to look on the social media if you want to be able to win that. That contest will go live here in a couple of days. But for now, it's the Stacy on the Right Show merch from Teespring that you can click through to the link and order it and get it directly to you. Fantastic, right? That's going to be super fun. So right now, it's my pleasure to welcome our next guest on the program. We have Timothy Snowball. He is an attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation. And we really appreciate your time today, Timothy. Thanks for joining in.
Stacy, so nice to join you. Thanks so much.
I'm really trying to hold myself together here because it seems like I'm the queen of bad news, but you have good news. You have actually some really fun. I like the way you guys phrase this up. That's why I was like, oh, yes. Thank you for sending this out, Jennifer. I want to have him on today to talk about this. It's all about socialism. Tell us more.
Yeah. So I have a piece right up now in the Hill magazine online, and it's about socialism. And it turns out that, most Americans, I think people forget. You wind up, watching the news, watching this AOC and DC and this, Bernie Sanders and all these people talking about socialism. And it turns out that, most Americans don't like socialism. They have kind of that common sense American take on things, I think, where they go, well, this doesn't really reflect the way that the economics or the world actually works. You can't just print money and give it away or take away people's, hard-earned productivity and just give it to people who aren't producing. That's just not the way reality functions.
So when you talk about taking money away from hardworking people and giving it to people who don't work, anybody whose head is screwed on even partially, remember, so you're a guy, so you might not have ever seen these, but back when I was a kid, Barbies it was basically a pop-on head. So if you pull the head too far to the right or the left, it would pop off. And sometimes I feel like the people we're dealing with have these Barbie heads where there's nothing in there. When you pop a Barbie head off, what you can see is the little plugs of hair on the inside. The head is completely empty. And I feel like these pop-off headed liberals are like, well, all we have to do is take the money from the rich people and give it to the poor people. And what do they think is going to happen if a poor person, and this is obviously I have sympathy for the poor, and I believe that we are mandated as Christians to care for them and to help them out of their situation by giving them employment and instruction and, basically helping them along, not just feeding and clothing and, helping them continue in poverty. But the fact is a poverty-stricken person does not have the same money management skills as a business person who has gotten there through the sweat of their brow. Even if the business person inherited some money and started off with a little nest egg, they still had to keep that money and grow it. And that's not easy. So how do we get these pop-off liberals to understand what you've shared here? Because you have these fantastic points. I want you to give those too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that there are some economic fallacies in there that are taken advantage by some of the politicians on the left, right? Like the idea of a fixed pie. A lot of times when they're describing people who've done very well in our market economy, they'll say, oh, look how much these so-called rich people have benefited by their exploitation of the poor. That's not the way it works in a voluntary market economy, right? So you look at a Donald Trump or a Bill Gates or a Mark Zuckerberg. Think about how much value these individuals have actually added to our society. The fixed pie fallacy, that's really not the way things are. An entrepreneur, when they come out with a new idea or a new invention, that makes everyone else's life better. And the fact that they're compensated for that should be a very American thing. You bring up the politicians and their rhetoric. You look at like a Alexandria or Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders. They know exactly what they're doing by tapping into a lot of these resentful feelings that a lot of people have that are poor in this country. And the fact of the matter is, you meet socialists every now and again, and they've got these ideas of equality, and you look at their goal and you say, well, their goal is basic fairness. They're just going about it the wrong way. And you mentioned Christianity, and you mentioned our common values as Americans. I think that, we can all agree in the end goal of wanting the individual to be better off. You were talking about training or increased education. I think we can all agree on that, but it's an inversion of values when it comes to socialists, and therefore the means that they choose based on those values really are distortions of our American ideal.
They are. They totally are. And so I'm going to run down these. You have 5 key points to lead would-be socialist enthusiasts back on the right track. And this is from your article at thehill.com. You have an opinion piece up there. Socialism is neither a fair nor progressive political philosophy. Number 1, socialism is not new. Number 2, contrary to popular belief, it's not working in Europe. Let's go there.
Sure,
how do you prove it's not working in Europe? Because that's what people beat me over the head with.
Absolutely. I think these points really spring from the idea that, like, people who espouse socialism or talk about socialism, they don't really even know what that means. There's no real set of ideals. If you were talking about capitalism or American ideals of individual rights, those are very discrete categories, right? Socialism kind of becomes whatever is the primary talking point on the left. It's this amorphous category. And so my goal here was really to run through and say, well, maybe the way we can define socialism is to define what it isn't. And as you mentioned, socialism, if the 20th century has taught us anything, it's that socialism has failed every time it's been attempted with massive casualties of human life and suffering. Socialism in Europe, right? I mean, I love, sometimes you'll hear politicians in Sweden or something come out and say, we're not socialists. The reason our economy is doing so well is because of deregulation and increased market dynamics. We're not socialists. It's socialists in America who are trying to kind of claim that mantle for them. The idea that socialism is more fair or more just. I mean, who are we to decide how much wealth is too much wealth? Or the dynamics that I mentioned, the fact that these entrepreneurs, you don't open a business or invent something and just, it's not like you're extorting money from people. People are buying that product. They engage in Facebook. They buy the Windows program because those things are improvements to our way of doing business or our way of life. Capitalism, anyone who hasn't heard of Milton Friedman, I would encourage you to get on YouTube and look up Milton Friedman videos. He was one of the primary, market economists of our time. He used to make the point that capitalism is the best mechanism yet discovered by mankind to raise the plight of the poorest people. This is absolutely indisputable historical fact. And finally, the idea that socialism would somehow be better for the individual. I mean, that one is really a tough pill to swallow when the entire theory, the entire outlook is premised on the idea of grouping people into groups and dispensing benefits upon different groups based upon different, shared characteristics. It's really the individual no longer has rights. And so I always find that to be a strange argument.
Well, yeah. And so again, there's so much here to unpack, but what you're saying about the European nations is that they're using capitalist free market systems for their economy. They may have socialist type policies for their health care and for other kind of so on the social side, they're much more redistributionary and kind of grouped together, which is why they have a poorer healthcare system than we do, and why a lot of their things are not as good as ours. But on the business side and their economy, on the economic part, they're much more free market.
Well, sure. That's the free market and capitalist policies. That's how wealth is created, right? And so government has no ability to confiscate our productivity through taxes unless we're producing something, right? And so it's countries have realized that if they're going to support these large social safety nets, like you talked about with an increased healthcare spending or education or any of these other policies, you've got to have an income coming in. You have to have people and institutions producing wealth then to be redistributed. And so it's an interesting argument. I mean, if Sweden or Denmark or some of these European countries, if their large social safety nets are what qualify them as socialist writ large, then arguably the United States is a socialist country, and I don't think that that's true, and therefore, but it's a scary thought to think of if you're defining it that way.
Well, but that's what people tell me all the time. I'll say, those countries are not equal to us in GDP. I mean, and you can use simple sites like Wikipedia and others online to find the GDP of individual European countries. And at the top, it's always the United States. So what they do is they'll say, well, we are the EU and you're the United States, so break it down by state. Well, when you break it down by state, the top 20 of them are United States, so American states, the top 20. And then you see the European countries kind of eke in. They compare to some of our mid-range states in GDP. So there's no way you can deny that America's economic engine, it's not because we bully other people or steal their economic ideas or their intellectual property. We don't force our way into other countries. We don't force anybody to do business with us. In fact, most of our trade relationships are much more beneficial to our trading partners than they are to us. And we still drive the economic engine of the entire world with a population of over 300 million. So there has to be something that's different there that you can point to. And I believe it's that we have the true free market system. We do have checks and balances, and it's not a completely open market, but it's definitely the freest you're going to find. And any other country that replicates that seems to have similar results.
Well, sure. And I think that you ultimately make a great point, which again goes to ideals. Socialism, the underlying, the entire idea of socialism is force, right? That they want to force individuals to do what they think is best for you. And that really flies in the face of the American system. I mean, the United States was founded upon certain ideals, right? The rule of law, constitutionally limited government, and the rights of the individual. And that, those ideas were revolutionary back in the 18th century, and they're just as revolutionary today. And to the degree that we can get back to those ideals, or we can, bolster those ideals, that's what led us to be one of the, the greatest country on earth in the history of the Western world. Is our fidelity to those basic ideas. And socialism runs exactly counter to that. So I think it's a failure of education. I think, unfortunately, a lot of college students who are out there holding socialism signs are rationally ignorant. They're placing ideology above reality. But at the heart of it, again, it's just an inversion of values. And so I'm always encouraged to speak to you and to speak to others, and hopefully many in your audience will understand that what we're talking about here is a fight for the future of our republic, right? And not everyone can run for office. Not everyone can donate large sums of money to politicians. But what we can do is try to do something every day to further, the future of the republic, whether that's speaking to your children or speaking to your neighbor or volunteering in a classroom. It's going to depend on us. We can't depend upon kind of the ruling class to do this because, no ruling class in history has ever given up their own power. Jefferson was quoted as saying, when it comes to questions of power, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down by the chains of the Constitution. And so the way that we can get back to our constitutional republic is really going to depend upon us.
You summed that up perfectly, and I just want to thank you so much for your time today and for coming on. You kind of short notice, but you were able to get in. And especially huge shout out to Jennifer Oman for her work in getting us together. I think, thank God you wrote the piece. Thank God we can have this conversation and really just lay it out there. And your call for people to volunteer in the community and to espouse these values, it just can't come at a better time. And I know people are busy, but you're not talking about a full-time job. You're talking about volunteering as you can, as your schedule permits, but kind of committing to that so that the voices are out there that speak the truth. And I really appreciate that. Timothy Snowball, Pacific Legal Foundation, thank you for coming over today.
Happy to come back anytime. Thanks.
All right. Talk to you again soon. We are just I know, super, super busy right now and on the program. And so I said I would tell you about this story, and I have just a minute and a half left. You got this guy. He's been charged with illegally flying a helicopter in and out of his backyard for months. And the picture on this, I have to post this so you guys can see. It's in East Brookfield, and his name is Antonio Santonastazo. That's an interesting. He's 59 years old. He's going to be arraigned Thursday afternoon in federal court in Worcester. And his neighbors say they turned him in because they were nervous. He was flying in and out of the backyard low and fast. Now, he lives in a residential neighborhood where You can see his driveway and then you know, like some trees and then his next door neighbor. Now, he was arrested back in 2000, charged and convicted of stealing a helicopter from Norwood Airport, and this was May of 2000. At that point, because of the arrest and conviction, he lost his license to fly. So then he bought a used helicopter in Texas in February of 2018, and 3 weeks later, a neighbor called investigators saying Santonastazo was flying the helicopter in and out of his backyard. He's using it like a car. He said he was lying about whether or not he could actually fly it legally, because this man just must love flying helicopters. How about you live that best life? All right. Have a fantastic afternoon. God bless. More Stacy on the Right tomorrow.
Urban Family Talk. Urban Family Talk.
Secular progressives in the United States have worked to alter the very nature of our republic.
For the progressives, there are no longer any God-given natural rights.
AFA Executive Vice President Ed Vitagliano helps you understand the progressive threat to the American Republic. Get your copy of this powerful DVD from the AFA Cultural Institute at afastore.net.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham is pushing for changes to immigration and asylum laws. Ellison Barber has the latest.
Past few weeks, Senator Graham has been very clear that he believes the biggest thing that needs to change is asylum laws. He's called that priority number one. In Senator Graham's words, the U.S. needs to toughen up the asylum standard. He says that because so many people ultimately fail to meet the asylum standard, he says over 90%, the asylum standard is what needs to change. Graham has said that he wants to work with the White House, propose something that President Trump will ultimately sign. He's also warned Democrats if they don't get on board with this plan, it will help President Trump come 2020. Minority Leader Senator Chuck Schumer has said that Democrats will look at the proposal, the plans coming from the White House and this administration.
The Federal Communications Commission is taking aim at robocalls. Rachel Sutherland tells us what they're doing.
Annoying robocalls may soon be a thing of the past under a new plan allowing phone companies to block the calls automatically and opt consumers into the service by default. FCC Chairman Najib Pai made the announcement on a conference call.
The American people are fed up with illegal robocalls. It is the top complaint we receive from consumers each and every year.
Consumers could still opt in for robocalls. Pai says the plan goes into effect June 6, but it's unclear when cell carriers would start offering the service. In Washington, Rachel Sutherland, Fox News.
Alabama lawmakers eye a Supreme Court challenge to Roe v. Wade, passing a near-total ban on abortion. Jonathan Seri reports.
Alabama's Republican governor is yet to say whether she'll sign a bill to criminalize abortion for doctors who perform them. The state Senate passed the measure, which makes no exception for cases of rape or incest. Supporters expect the bill to face legal challenge and hope the issue will ultimately be resolved by an increasingly conservative Supreme Court. Terry Collins sponsored the bill in Alabama's House of Representatives.
To address the issue that Roe versus Wade was decided on, which is that baby in the womb a person.
If the governor signs the bill, the law would take effect in 6 months. Jonathan Seri, Fox News.
The Texas Senate has revived a so-called Save Chick-fil-A bill. Chris Woodward explains.
The bill would penalize governments for taking adverse action against individuals or businesses, including the canceling of a contract based on their religious beliefs. Recently, the San Antonio City Council withdrew a contract allowing Chick-fil-A to open a location inside the San Antonio airport. Some of the councilors took exception to Chick-fil-A donations to organizations including the Salvation Army and Fellowship of Christian Athletes. The councilors claim the organizations have a history of anti-LGBTQ behavior. State Representative Julie Johnson and the LGBTQ caucus prevented the bill from coming to a vote in the House. Things appeared to be over until Monday when things picked up in the Senate. Jonathan Sines of Texas Values is optimistic about the bill's chances.
It's become clear we need to have a statewide law that leaves no doubt that Christian-owned businesses or businesses like Chick-fil-A that give donations to Christian ministries like the Salvation Army, they cannot be punished by the government like San Antonio did for that charitable giving. And what's unfortunate, the reason this bill didn't move forward in the House is because you have a member of the newly formed LGBT caucus. They're more interested in making a name for themselves and scoring political points than they are about doing what's good for the people.
I'm Chris Woodward.
Over 250,000 cars are being recalled by Ford over concerns they could roll away. Jeff Manasso reports.
Ford Motor Company is recalling 270,000 Fusion sedans in North America, covering the 2013 through 2016 model years, that the automaker says could roll away due to a faulty shifter cable that can detach from the transmission, allowing a driver to remove the ignition key when the vehicle is not in park. Ford says it's aware of 3 reports of property damage and 1 injury potentially related to the issue. Until a fix is available, Ford is telling Fusion owners to always use the parking brake. In Chicago, Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
U.S. retail sales slipped last month as Americans cut back their spending on clothes, appliances, and building materials. For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
Dexter's What's happening in our cities, what's happening in our government, what's happening in our churches, this mess that's going on in the United States of America, the reason for it, the blame can go squarely on God's people. God's not expecting the heathens of the world to do his work here on earth. That job goes to you and to me.
Time to get back to God. Weekday afternoons at 4 Central on Urban Family Talk. She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
The Green New Deal that's a hoax like the hoax I just went through. I'm not even sure. It might be a bigger one, and mine was pretty big.
If you're accused of a crime by a grand jury and they don't indict you, the prosecutor doesn't go all over town saying, we thought he did this, we thought he did this. This is all the evidence. That's why a grand jury is secret.
And now, Stacy Washington.
Hey there. Welcome to the program. We are just a fantastic program today. We had so much fun chatting with our guests from last hour, and this hour is no different. We are going to be covering a ton of different content. Let me get to some of that for you. We actually have Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. He's going to be joining us in just a minute here. We're also going to be talking about Senator Rand Paul's constitutional issue. He says there is one, but it involves the FISA court, not something that President Trump may or may not have done. Also, and actually I need to let my producer know, we're calling Alan West right now. They just changed the time. We're actually at the top of the hour with him. So if you could call him now, that would be great. And then we're going to be talking about John King correcting the record on Tlaib's lies. And so this is not someone who's right leaning. This is someone who's literally on the left and felt like they needed to correct this woman. And then John Bash talking about our immigration system. And as we learn more about what the proposal is that's coming from Senator Lindsey Graham, this is even more important. It's more important than ever. So we have a ton of content. And if you're just tuning into the show, you missed a total treat. You have to go back to the podcast over at afr.net or urbanfamilytalk.com. We actually had Dr. Alex McFarland on. He was chatting with us. He's the host of Exploring the Word on American Family Radio. He just unpacked the Equality Act and how important it is for us to be aware of it and to tell other people what it really is. And then we talked to Timothy Snowball. He's an attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation. And we talked about socialism. And I'm going to give you those really quickly. We ran through the 5 key points. Socialism is not new. Contrary to popular belief, it doesn't work in Europe. It's not more fair or more just. It's not better for the individual. It's not superior to capitalism. Now, this is all kind of basic explainer stuff, but it's, obviously it's not basic, because if it were, people wouldn't need this Oh, okay. People wouldn't need this explained to them. So again, what Timothy Snowball suggested was that we, in our volunteer work, we explain the importance of the capitalist system. And there are a lot of great comparisons that you can make. He named off someone who I prefer, if you want to understand how capitalism works as opposed to socialism, the book Economics, I think it's called Pure Economics by Thomas Sowell. And he's written like 50 or 60 books, but that is one of the books that it's a big, thick book, but it's perfect reading. It's not too difficult. It's not one of those ones where you're like, I have to put this down. I can't. It's actually fascinating because he unpacks a lot of different cultural phenomenon that we attribute to racism and other things like that. The book's about economics, but he covers how some behaviors by people groups are actually, they're kind of hereditary. They're passed down generationally. And you see those same behaviors in people across the pond in England, only these people weren't black, they were white. So it's not about skin color. It's about basically you have to have the free market so that people who want to succeed can. And the largesse of those people is what then drives philanthropic work, et cetera, et cetera. And just one more thing. And I got to say this to you. I'm not, this isn't my idea, but it has to be shared. Rich people on the whole are very philanthropically minded, giving, a huge portion of what they make to disadvantaged people, causes, etc. But there's a certain group of people that I see that aren't very philanthropically minded, and they happen to be the titans of social media industry. And we've mentioned it here on the show a few times. We've talked about Jeff Bezos and Zuckerberg, and some others. So one of the things that has totally been a bummer about that is that we don't see them giving. They actually don't have the ability to, they don't have the ability to give to organizations or to people because they have so many people that they hate. And I think it's kind of sad because when you look at the amount of money that they have, the amount of money that a Jeff Bezos or a Mark Zuckerberg, the things they could do with that money to help people instead of trying to make the government force people who are already giving, who are in the middle class, to pay for even more by higher taxation and programs that don't work, it becomes a bit of a travesty. So, all I want to do when we're talking about these things is I don't ever want to make someone like Jeff Bezos be forced to give his money to something. I don't begrudge him his money. I don't think that Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg should have their money taxed or taken away from them. Quite the opposite. They have every right to do what they want, but I have every right to make judgment calls on what they're doing with it or not doing with it, and the way that they're behaving, when it comes to, they want the government to force people to do stuff, but they don't want to do those same things themselves. So let's move on through the show sheet and update. We are not going to have Alan West with us because we had a time zone mix-up. He thought we were on Eastern and we're on Central, so we're an hour behind, and he's actually on a plane. We won't have him today, but we will get him. We'll reschedule him. We'll get him on for possibly next week sometime. We're pretty booked up for the remainder of this week, but we'll definitely get him on to talk about the NRA. And he's actually calling for the resignation of Wayne LaPierre for financial irregularities. And so I definitely want to talk to him, and we will. So let's get to Senator Rand Paul talking about the primary constitutional issue involving the FISA. It's number 3.
One of the things that Adam Schiff and the other partisans don't understand is that if you're accused of a crime by a grand jury and they don't indict you, the prosecutor doesn't go all over town saying, we thought he did this, we thought he did this, this is all the evidence. That's why a grand jury is secret. See, the Mueller investigation said that the president did not commit any underlying crime. And so now they're all saying he obstructed justice about something that was not considered to be a crime. So this is really, I think, degenerated into partisan politics. And the best thing we could do at this point is say, let's get on with the country's business. Are there some underlying constitutional issues? Yes, the primary underlying constitutional issue here is whether or not the FISA court, which is supposed to spy on foreigners, which has a lower constitutional standard, can you use the FISA court to spy on a presidential campaign? Can you use the FISA court to seek information about Americans? That truly is a travesty and truly is unconstitutional, and that's the root of the problem we should be addressing.
Okay, so he's right. And haven't we all been concerned about the FISA court? So the latest news out about the FISA court is that they have unmasked more Americans than any other year of their existence in the past 12 months. And it's reaching epidemic levels. Hundreds of thousands of Americans who have communicated with foreigners have had their identities unmasked, and they've been basically surveilled without a warrant. Warrantless surveillance. That is unconstitutional. People should be going to jail. Well, of course, after due process. I mean, I don't believe in jailing folks before they've been given due process, but you understand what I'm saying. People should be prosecuted and going to jail. This idea that we can use the government to cover over unconstitutional activities, that's not okay. You cannot say, well, we're going to stand up this court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. We're going to give a court the ability to surveil people who are not protected by the Constitution, but we're not going to surveil Americans. And then later you're like, ooh, creeping unconstitutionalism, creeping tyranny. We actually unmasked a whole bunch of Americans, like hundreds of thousands of them. And now we know what they talked about and we didn't have a warrant. But we're protected by the fight. No, you're not. My question is, where are these attorneys? Where is the ACLU? Where are these people who claim that they care about the Constitution and the individual rights of Americans? Why aren't they out there suing to get the FISA court back into line with the Constitution? And I understand why it's there. So before we get onto a place where it appears that I don't understand that the FISA court was stood up to try to combat terrorism, I get it. I'm with you. I want to fight terrorism too. But now, so why did they unmask those hundreds of thousands of Americans? And how many terror-related prosecutions came from those unmaskings? And how many of those Americans who were unmasked turned out to be criminally minded or terrorism involved? So if the number is really teensy tiny, like 0, then why were they unmasked? Oh, because they can. And as long as they're allowed to do it with no oversight, without the ACLU riding in on their hobby horses and demanding some constitutional rectification, without this going before one of these appellate courts or even the Supreme Court, without the Department of Justice even taking this up, I know that would be like one part of the government suing another, but that's what has to happen here. Somebody's got to have some principles, enough principles to actually say, you know what? We got to do something about this. This isn't right. This is a violation of the constitutional rights of Americans. And regardless of political party, you know what? I'd like to see some bipartisanship on that. Let's get some bipartisanship on this puppy right here. So then you had Trey Gowdy. He was on the television talking about Barr and how Barr assigned this prosecutor to investigate the Russia probe. And this is something pretty, like, again, wow. It's number 2.
You know, over the weekend, Senator Graham has really exercised over the lack of corroboration of this dossier that was used in court filings. So the question then becomes, was it unverified, uncorroborated when you used it? And then when did you begin to corroborate it? And what I'm telling Mr. Durham or whoever is going to look into this, I think you'll see late in 2016, well after it had been used, it was still unverified, and the people responsible for it were referring to it as unverified, and one or the other demanded that it be included in the intelligence assessment, which then leaked, which then prompted the discussion you and I are having now publicly.
And so the leaking and then this and then that, you know, and we will, later in the week, we'll kind of unpack the timeline around the surveillance. Like, did the surveillance come before or after the dossier? Was the dossier the reason for the surveillance, the spying? Or was the dossier the justification for the spying, which occurred before the dossier? We're gonna unpack that on the show. I would set your clock, set your timer, set your reminder, put it on your calendar, do whatever you got to do to make sure you tune into the show on Friday. We're gonna Monday. We're gonna unpack that. I'm laying it out for you because there's so much for us to cover. I can't get to every single little thing right in this program actually. So I just, again, Where are they? Sometimes you want to look at, you're saying to yourself, the ACLU always comes in when it's something having to do with religion. Like if people are sitting around singing hymns in public and enjoying themselves or listening to some Christian contemporary music and someone breaks out a guitar and they start getting happy, the ACLU is right there. You can't do that in public. Separation of church and state. They got lawsuits. They have attorneys with big, thick, black, glasses on, expensive ones. And they come in with their little old selves and they start, raising a ruckus because they're like, you can't be doing that here. Anytime Christians are running a business and the business is thriving and successful and people are enjoying it, then they come in and they're like, well, yeah, I don't see any LGBT people here. You can't be having fun here without LGBT. And then you're like, well, wait, I didn't invite anyone. People are just coming and say, you got to have some LGBT people here. I mean, everywhere you look, you see people having fun and the ACLU is riding in trying to stop it. And then here we are. This is a totally different situation. This is an actual constitutional crisis. The FISA court represents that crisis. I agree with him completely. And where are they? Well, they're not going to be there. How about that? They're not going to be there for you. That's what. All right. I think I heard the music. We're getting ready to go to break. Check the phone lines. They're open. 866-963-2037. 866-963-2037. You can call in and join the program. Up next, we are going to be listening to John King correcting the record on Tlaib's lies about the Holocaust and the Jewish people. Yeah, that's what we're going to be up to. So stay right there. We'll be back with more.
Our Holy Land tour for March of 2020 is set. Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. Last year, we sold out in August, and I expect us to do that again this year. There is such a high demand, especially among Christians in America, to see Israel, the land of the Bible. So we're going again in March on our annual trek. So I wanted to go ahead and let you know if you want to sign up and register, get more information, whatever the case may be. If you want to go to our website, twholyland.com, twholyland.com, everything is there, twholyland.com. You can even print off a brochure from that website. It's going to be a wonderful time visiting Israel with brothers and sisters from across our country as we go to the Holy Land in March. So go ahead and get signed up now, twholyland.com.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Since a number of presidential candidates are warning about voter suppression, it seems like a good time to accurately define the term. Let's start with a simple issue. Cutting back early voting days is not voter suppression. Early voting in North Carolina reduced the days for early voting from 17 to 10. Florida reduced their early voting days from 14 to 8. Citizens who are properly registered can still vote, but the number of days you can vote early are less. If this were an example of voter suppression, then any of the states that don't provide early voting would be guilty of voter suppression. Hope you can see the fallacy of calling this voter suppression. Now let's look at the more common complaint that voter ID laws and other voter requirements constitute voter suppression. I've documented in previous commentaries that after most of these states instituted voter laws, minority voting increased. For example, Georgia law required voters to be removed from the polls if they had not cast a ballot in 3 years and did not respond to any inquiry by mail. Even though such voters were removed from the rolls, black voter registration increased, and in the last election, African American turnout also increased. All of these facts, along with other relevant statistics, haven't prevented candidates from making claims of voter suppression. In her keynote speech at the NAACP convention last week, Senator Kamala Harris proclaimed that without voter suppression, Stacey Abrams would be governor of Georgia, Andrew Gillum, governor of Florida. For the record, Abrams lost by 54,000 votes, Gillum lost by 32,000 votes. I hope you keep some of these facts in mind, since you'll be hearing more about voter suppression from a number of candidates. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
This is Stacy on the Right with Stacy Washington on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
But she also fails a critical fact and context test. Yes, as she said, Palestinians lost land in the creation of Israel. But she ignored the fact that Palestinian leaders at the time allied themselves with Hitler. And the total war was how the Arab world reacted to the declaration of Israeli independence.
Wow. What? So why is this a problem? Why can't we just admit that this woman has said awful anti-Semitic revisionary type things and that she should be censored for it? In fact, we've gone from the first horrible things that she said, who can even remember what those were, right? To now where if she says anything, their knee-jerk reaction is to defend it even before they know what she said. So you had Nancy Pelosi out there defending her. You had a whole bunch of them out there defending her. And then when they found out what she'd said, they really listened to it. They're like, well, darn, that actually is wrong. You know, she actually is revising. Does she mean that? Are we sure she understood what she was like? Because she said that. Yeah, that's what's going on. People are sitting around, and you know how it is. You're sitting and you're like, well, I don't know if he really meant, does he know what those words mean? Does he understand that those words mean what? They don't mean that. They mean that. That's people kind of trying to justify. They're like trying to figure out a way to make it better. Well, there's no way to make what she said better except for her to say, I got that wrong. I apologize. Now, admittedly, there are many of us. Yes, I said us over here on the right. Yes, right wing watch. I'm on the right. I'm a conservative. I'm black. And the fact that you're listening, it brings me joy. Excuse me, people. It brings me joy to know that you're tuning in and, rock on with your bad self. We appreciate you. We appreciate your, I don't want to call it hate. It's just like cataloging what they see to be things that people on the right are saying wrong. I also think it's funny that they call it right wing watch because there's no corresponding left wing watch. So who's watching the left wing? Honestly, the truth is it's MRC TV and Newsbusters and Tech Watch and Dan Gaynor and all those good folks. And God bless them. But the right wing watch, like they always pick on stuff that we say, like it's not okay for us to have our opinions and it's okay for them to report on it and to disagree. But I disagree with the name. And I also think it's crazy that they now know that I exist. And to be honest, I think they had noticed me like 5 or 6 years ago, but then I don't know if they stopped paying attention to me or if I haven't said anything incendiary, which I highly doubt, but they were back at it again. I have a Google alert that I noticed they'd actually noticed that I'd said something. It's something, actually, it's a story from onenewsnow.com. I will pull it up right here. Now, let me also, so remember in the end of the first hour, we were talking about this guy who flew his helicopter in and out of his backyard. And then he kind of lied saying that he was eligible to fly the plane, but he's really not. He says he said the FAA, he didn't know they revoked his license. He was unaware. He also made false statements about his application for a medical certificate, which you have to have in order to fly an aircraft. So he's charged with 1 count of serving as an airman without an airman certificate and 1 count of making false statements to federal agents. He actually faces up to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $250,000 if he's convicted. So pretty sad. Yeah. So I'm trying to pull up this Right Wing Watch article they had, and I don't see it here. I know that it was a Google alert for me, and that they said something about me, but I'll get it maybe on the next break. So how often does it happen that a person flies a helicopter as a personal vehicle? I don't know, but it was fascinating to me, the story. And this was in East Brookfield, Massachusetts. And I think, yeah, that's 6 days ago for Boston. And it's a story that has actually made it all over the place. Like it's a big, big story. They're actually lots of different places that are reporting this, because he's made more than 50 unlicensed flights with a helicopter that he had in his backyard. So apparently it's not common, but I do think it's a funny story. So in addition to all of these good things that we have going on here, and we did talk to, I don't know if you've just tuned into the show, welcome. Call lines are open at 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037. We've been talking a little bit about, and kind of weaving in and out, I had mentioned that we have one of our kids, our middle child, is graduating from high school on Monday. And it's just been, it's not been as emotionally draining as last year when it was our first child. But this time, it's almost as if time is speeding up. Every day that goes by, it's going faster and faster. And we're getting closer to the actual day. And I want to be focused, like, I'm focused on my work and then focus on what's going on here at home. But it's a bit discombobulating, if that's still a word. So we talked a little bit about the new law in Alabama, but we didn't kind of give the details of it. And I know when the law passed in New York, I gave all of the gory details of how they were basically legalizing infanticide and decriminalizing the killing of a baby while it's still in the womb. And usually those happen either by accident or manslaughter, or when a boyfriend or a husband wants to force a woman to have an abortion. And so that's no longer illegal. But Alabama State Senate actually, this has been the big news, that they've passed a controversial bill. And this, by the way, if you're wondering where I got the word controversial from, I'm on foxnews.com. Foxnews.com. And this is their wording by Vandana Rambaran. He wrote this piece. Alabama State Senate passed a controversial bill on Tuesday that would outlaw nearly all abortions in the state and make performing one a felony unless the mother's health is at risk. The bill will make the punishment of performing abortions up to 99 years or life in prison, although the woman who actually receives the abortion would not be subject to a felony charge. So the bill is actually passed the Alabama State House 74-3, and Democratic lawmakers actually wanted to add amendments on Tuesday that would create exceptions in the instances of rape and incest. They were put down. One of the Democrats, her name is State Senator Vivian Davis Figueres, said, "You don't have to raise that child. You don't have to carry that child. You don't have to provide for that child. And yet you want to make that decision." I love it that she's referring to it as a child. And then at the end, she says that decision. She should say, but yet you want to make sure that it can't be killed. That child can't be killed. Notice how somewhere mid-range in all of these arguments that the Democrats make about abortion, they always switch over. They call it a child at some point. They'll say that fetus, that clump of cells, that child. And then at the end, that decision, that choice. They euthanize it. They clean it up at the end so they don't have to say, well, it's not your choice to kill that child. It's the mom's. Okay. So they also had people coming forward, and like Democratic Senator Roger Smitherman talked about he and his wife aborting one of their children because the child had Down syndrome. And so he said, the legislature shouldn't have made that choice for me. Now, I got to say, he goes into some other arguments that are just crazy. He says, why don't we make amendments to this bill that make it a felony for a man to have a vasectomy? Why don't we expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act? Both were struck down. Those amendments didn't make it. Now, Republican Governor Kay Ivey has not confirmed whether she'll sign the measure into law, but during the 2018 midterms, 59% of voters expressed their support for a bill that completely banned abortions in the state of Alabama. And I've seen a lot of leftists saying the only reason they're doing this stuff is so they can, get these cases appealed and kicked to the Supreme Court so that the Supreme Court can overturn Roe v. Wade. And what I have to say about that, and obviously people feel like the court is ripe for this and it's the right time. But without Amy Coney Barrett on the court, in other words, that one more vote to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you've no guarantees because you can't rely on Judge Roberts. And you certainly can't, No offense to Kavanaugh. Y'all know how strong I was in supporting him. But he has been siding with the liberal justices. Now, maybe he's genuinely siding with the liberal justices because the cases represent freedom issues for Americans and the right for Americans to petition, their government or to sue and seek legal redress. But I don't think we should be as firm and strong about Kavanaugh and where he is, even though he said he was pro-life and he's a Catholic. I get it, but we shouldn't take anything for granted. And so it's good to see these pro-life laws pass, and I'm all about it. I'm here for it. And I want to see Governor Ivey sign that into law. But I also want to caution people against just, we can't just move forward without thought and consideration and carefully, plotting out the next moves. Pray, ask the Lord for guidance, move on that guidance. But we can't just take it for granted that, all of a sudden we have this conservative majority on the court. Just recently, I was reading this morning, they've been fighting like cats and dogs over the issue of the death penalty. And they've been having dueling dissenting rulings, and there have been a lot of death penalty cases that have come before them. And really, some of them are just nuisance death penalty cases where someone waits until the last possible minute to say, well, this state doesn't allow my particular religious person to come into the execution room, so I shouldn't have to be executed. As if the person being there would stop you from being executed or would make the execution easier for you. The fact is they're using like lethal injection where you just go to sleep. It's not like you're in front of a firing squad or something. And these people are using these excuses, and it's a typical tactic by attorneys who want to save the life of their client, whether they're guilty or not, whether they believe they're guilty or innocent or not. They use the due process clauses and provisions and everything else they can find, anything under the sun, including these incorrect kind of motions where they say, he's a Buddhist, and in this state, you're only allowed to have a Christian or Catholic or Jewish religious person, or he's a Muslim. And the Supreme Court struck that guy's claim down. He was a Muslim. He wanted to have an imam in the room with him when he was put to death. The Supreme Court said, nope, you're going to the chair. We're not changing laws for you. Just do it. But in this other case, the stay of execution was granted because he couldn't get a Buddhist person in to be with him as he was executed. He waited. He found out he couldn't bring him in, and then he waited until he was 2 days away from execution and then filed something. Basically, it's a last-minute ditch effort to stop the execution. So that's what's going on. These are direct challenges to Roe v. Wade. I wouldn't count on them. I would not count on the current court to do things just, you just think to yourself, oh, they're conservatives. We've got conservatives all over this country who act like Democrats, live like Democrats, talk like Democrats, and disappoint us like Democrats. The idea that we can just trust that everybody who's on the court who was appointed by a Republican would behave in a certain way when faced with the issue of Roe v. Wade is not taking the lay of the land and actually what's happening here into consideration. So then there's this story, this is kind of interesting. Beth Moore is challenging a theologian, explaining why she feels women should preach in church. Now, full disclosure, for my part, I don't believe that women should pastor. The Bible talks about women being placed over men in a position of authority for teaching the scriptures, and that is not something that God has called for us to do. It doesn't mean we can't lead Bible studies or things like that, but pastoring whole congregations, that's not biblical. That's what I feel that I've read in the scriptures. That's what I know. So you've got, she's actually a Bible teacher, prominent Southern Baptist Bible teacher, Beth Moore, and she's ignited a firestorm on Twitter because this theologian singled her out in a blog post because she's been encouraging women to preach. His name is Owen Strachan, and he's an associate professor of Christian theology at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kansas City, Missouri. Now, in his May 7th blog post, he was surprised that both Beth Moore and SBC President J.D. Greer support a woman teaching and preaching to the corporate body. So again, I have no problem with women leading, a ministry, doing all these other different kind of stuff. But when we're talking about pastoring and being over in headship and authority over husbands men, etc. I'm not there for it. Owen Stracan has actually, he's shocked. He followed up on Twitter the next day. He said, here's his quote, "Complementarians disagree cheerfully about much. One thing we have massive agreement on, women do not preach on Sunday to the church. Doing so is functional egalitarianism. We will not capitulate here. Complementarians embrace the scriptural view that the role of men and women is distinct and complements one another within the home and the church. Egalitarians believe that the Bible calls for mutual submission in Christian relationships without a hierarchy." Now, I can tell you that's not what the scripture says. It doesn't say that men are to submit to the wife and the wife to the husband. It says women submit to your husbands and men love your wives as Christ loved the church. Remember what Christ did for the church. He died for us. He experienced the weight of all of our sin for all eternity, all of it, and received the recompense that was meet to us. And then, after conquering and vanquishing death, he then went on and was resurrected and rose to the right hand of the Father. I mean, come on. This is not that tough. And if you disagree, for goodness sakes, you're welcome to your opinion. You are welcome. But don't send me 80,000 links to try to change my mind. I'm not here for that. I'm not here for you to teach me. My favorite is when someone disagrees with me and says, "You're so teachable on other issues." Am I? I kind of think I'm more like a stick in the mud. Once I know something, I'm not moving. A stick in concrete even. I'm not teachable at all. No offense. All right, when we get back, we'll have more for you. Stay there.
When an abortion-minded woman walks into a preborn pregnancy center, she encounters love and compassion and gets to meet her baby by ultrasound.
And I was like, I'm going to go to the abortion clinic. And I already had my mind made up.
This mom didn't make it to the abortion clinic. Instead, God led her to a preborn center.
And the lady is giving me my ultrasound. She's like making these weird faces. And then she's like, "It's 2." And I'm like, I just start crying. I started texting my friends and like, I can't.
The Ministry of Preborn was able to help this mom save not just one life, but 2 through ultrasounds. Preborn centers help save babies' lives and souls. Preborn runs and leads Christian pregnancy centers all over the country. To find out more, go to preborn.com. That's preborn.com. Or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. Your love can save a life.
I have 2 dogs. Sometimes when we go walking, they'll get a sticker in their paw. My dachshund will stop, hold up that foot, and just look annoyed because it has slowed her down and that she needs my help to get rid of it. The terrier, on the other hand, would rather limp along like, "I'm okay, I'm just walking it off," than to stop for me to take that painful thing out of her paw. It made me think, we're like that when it comes to our relationship with God. We either have complete reliance on Him and turn to Him as soon as we have a need, or we go along suffering, trying to fix it all ourselves. I've done both. How about you? There's lots less pain and suffering when you choose to turn to Jesus right away. But maybe you've never made the decision to follow Him and don't know how to ask Him. This life is much easier to navigate when you're relying on Jesus. If you'd like to find out more, call 888-NEED-HIM or chat with us at chataboutjesus.com.
The Dean's List with Janice Dean.
A stranger's random act of kindness buying meals for students on their prom day makes today's Dean's List. Therese DeLeon and a prom group of 10 friends arrived at Ted's Bulletin for dinner in D.C. As they were looking over the menu, their server returned to the table to inform them they were in for a special treat and had a huge surprise. At first, the group thought it was a joke because there were so many other prom groups there as well. And when they realized their server wasn't kidding, they were speechless. At the end of the meal, the server identified the woman who covered their tab. The prom group walked over and thanked her for making their night truly special and much more memorable. She reminded them to always love ourselves and that they were beautiful. Before parting ways, they all huddled together and took a picture, which Therese posted on Twitter. She added, "It was refreshing and enlightening to know there are still kind-hearted people out there. Thank you to the kind stranger for your wonderful gesture and for making their prom even more memorable." Janice Dean, Fox News.
You can watch a live stream of the show on Facebook or YouTube at Stacy on the Right. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
I'm the U.S. Attorney with the largest stretch of southern border, some 660 miles. And there are two big things we need to do. First, we need a lot tougher border security. That means more barriers like walls, but it also means more communication technology, more agents, more roads. We need to be able to prevent people from entering this country illegally. They need to come in legally. The second thing we need to do is fix our broken asylum system, as I mentioned earlier. Right now, only 13% of people that make an asylum claim actually win that claim. Most people are presenting claims that don't have merit, but just crossing illegally and presenting that claim, you get to stay here for years. Well, that creates a huge incentive for people to come into this country illegally. We have got to fix that system.
Well, he's totally right about that. Totally right about that. There's no denying that we currently incentivize illegal entry because if it wasn't profitable and it didn't yield the desired results, so many wouldn't do it. Call lines are open at 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037. So that was John Bash talking about how we need to fix our broken immigration system. And I just want to give a little bit more detail to kind of circle back around here on the issue with Beth Moore and the women teaching the men and all that stuff. She had a lengthy Twitter thread so a series of tweets that she put out about this. And in some of the tweets, it seems almost like they're arguing beside each other instead of with each other because she's talking about teaching women in church for 40 years. He's not talking about her teaching women. He's talking about her addressing the congregation from the pulpit as a preacher. Full disclosure, that has happened at our church before. So we attend a non-denominational evangelical church. So not the same rules and, strictures as the Southern Baptist Convention. But that doesn't change what I believe about it. And I understand that people are going to have disagreements about this. And that's what's happening here. He closes this out. Strahan says, and here's the quote he has, "For a woman to teach and preach adult men is to defy God's word and God's design. Elders must not allow such a sinful practice. To do so is to bring the church body into disobedience against God." And so the title of his piece is "Divine Order in a Chaotic Age." And so he talks about evangelicals. He talks about, the denomination that my husband and I attend. He says in his piece here, he says, "The meaning of manhood and womanhood. Many evangelicals have little idea on how to respond to the view that's just described." And before, he says, "Preaching order in an age that despises it." So he talks about our culture not embracing divine order in either scriptural form or natural form. Our culture is anti-order. And so you have to agree with that. What we see happening in America today with the birth rate declining is a direct result of marriage being out of order. And I'm not talking about the redefinition of marriage with same-sex marriage. That is also an offshoot of marriage being out of order. It is too many men not assuming headship over their homes, too many women who will not be led, too much feminism, too much of this idea that men and women aren't just equal, but they are indistinguishable from each other, and that any man can fill the role that a woman can fill, and any woman can fill the role that any man can fill, and that children don't need two parents. I mean, once you get far enough down that path, you see not just degradation of the family itself, but you see people avoiding making families. And the decline in the birth rate is the natural thing that passes, that happens. It's the natural next occurrence after the passage of same-sex marriage. It has happened in every European country. First, they have the rise of feminism. Then they have the rise of LGBT as a movement. Then those people allow same-sex marriage. Then people stop getting married. and they stop having children. Out of wedlock birth increases, but intact marital births decline. And then you get to a place like in Japan where they just aren't making enough people to replace their population. Germany is the same. A number of European countries have dropped below the death spiral, which is 1.6. Replacement is 2.3. America's hovering right at, I think the last time I looked, it was 2.1. So the clarion call that Strahan is making here, he's talking about, this chaotic age that we live in and women preaching. And this is just an extension of what we've seen in the home. We've seen the natural order of the intact family obliterated. We've seen women, honestly, this is, I see this so often now, I'm no longer even, I don't even bat an eyebrow anymore. And that is the number of young couples that we encounter. And I just encounter them in many different situations. And the first thing you hear out of them is, oh, well, I got to figure out what we're going to do for our menu for this week. And it's always the man. The men are menu planning and they're cooking or they're looking at recipes. The men are talking about what they're going to eat. And the women are just standing there smiling, looking cute. They honestly don't even understand how ridiculous it is that the man would be doing all the cooking. And I know that there have been couples that have had that kind of reversal of roles for eons. There have been men who've cooked and, their wives are not good cooks and they just don't. But for it to be at such an epidemic where young women no longer know how to cook, their feminist moms never taught them because they didn't want their daughters to be responsible for cooking. And so the boys who they're all taught how to cook because you shouldn't have to rely on a woman and you shouldn't have to wait for a woman to do anything for you. Then the men actually know how to cook. They were raised to know how to cook. Or they take cooking classes. You'd be shocked if you go to the grocery stores that have those wonderful little cooking events in the evenings that you can sign up for, how many men are in there learning how to cook. Because their wives won't do it. The women that they're in love with don't cook. And that's just one aspect of what I'm talking about. It's also the prevalence of the stay-at-home dad or the non-working spouse that's a man. The women who they not only assume the responsibility for the entire care of the financial prosperity of the family, but they're also in the leadership role where if they have to decide between one place or another for vacation, she has the final say. The woman has the final say on so much. And for some people, they're like, well, what's wrong with that? Well, I don't know. You tell me. Why aren't we having more kids? Why don't we have more intact families? Why isn't the divorce rate declining? If women being in charge is so fantastic, why aren't the other social metrics increasing? And I am not some, I'm not a person who believes that women should be subjugated to men. But when we get away from the natural order that God has ordained for us, we get into this territory where now that we've completely upended all of the natural, rudimentary, basic structures of marriage, now people like Beth Moore, in a reaction to misogyny and abusive situations that she's seen and observed and maybe even been subjected to herself, things that people need to repent for and apologize to her for and request her forgiveness for. Instead, she's turning everything on its head and saying, well, because some men in leadership in the Southern Baptist Church have been misogynists or have condoned or covered up this or that, bad acts, behavior, etc., now we just need to have women be preachers too. That's not how this works. You don't right one wrong by instituting another one. Which means if she's allowed to propagate this idea and many come alongside her and begin to believe it, you have a lot of dissatisfied women sitting in the church wishing that, I wish our preacher was a woman. You have a lot of women going and starting up churches and everything that comes along with that. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's not what it's supposed to be. So he says evangelicals need help, the meaning of manhood and womanhood. He says many evangelicals have little idea on how to respond and that we've had very little grounding in the order of creation. We know God created the earth, but we haven't heard much more than that. Now, I don't have this problem. I am not biblically illiterate here. That's what he's describing. They can sense that homosexuality is sinful, but beyond a few biblical citations, they do not have a doctrinal position on the matter. Now, I go to an evangelical church, and I am surrounded by people who defy this assessment that he's making. They've heard little about divine design. Again, I'm not sure what evangelicals he's bumping into, but this is not accurate of the evangelical churches that I've been a member of here in the St. Louis metro area. Now, he says the design and order of creation, the divine design, is vital, grounded in theistic ontology itself, the very bedrock of Christian theology and Christian worldview. You could say it this way: there's order in the home, there's order in the churches, there's order in the world God has made. You can't just could say it. You should say it that way. That's a perfect way of summing it up. So he says God doesn't tell us to select leaders according to the gifting and talent. The Lord, working through the Spirit, calls only godly men to provide spiritual leadership, shepherding, and teaching for the gathered assembly of God's people. All this, as we have said, is spiritual and ecclesial order. It's dependent upon God making of the sexes. First Adam was formed, then Eve. Okay. And then he goes on, and I'm kind of giving you the highlights here. Scripture and history, men are called to shepherd and instruct the corporate body. I think that's right. I don't think that's harmful to women at all. It's really great for women and men if we take the Bible at its word and operate within it. If we take the Bible at its word, these are his words, then we recognize there is no way for a woman to instruct the gathered church, whether in an authoritative or non-authoritative way. Congregational preaching and teaching is authoritative, for the word of God is authoritative. There is no non-authoritative way to preach and teach the Bible. Any who would doubt this point might recall how Paul contrasts the words of men with the word of God. So he's speaking about in the church, in the body. It's an interesting piece. I would just say, one more thing. He mentions Mother's Day. He says, in the terms of the ministry and in Christian testimony, women are free, gloriously free to evangelize, witness to the glory of God in the secular workplace, serve in the mission field, ideally on teams populated by men who can serve as pastors. Yet we cannot miss this. The scriptural focus on feminine domesticity means the church joyfully promotes homemaking as a glorious call of God. Whatever the secular culture says, the Lord loves motherhood, wifely submission to a husband in everything, family building, and the training of children to know Christ. So, wow. He reiterates that women should not preach or offer public teaching in the gathered worship service in local churches. So I think he makes a good point, and I think it's kind of, obviously it's an argument that will continue to be had for people who believe that the Bible says something different. They're not going to be swayed by his argument. And I just would hope that people would see his argument for the basis of it rooted in Scripture, as opposed to seeing it as misogynistic. I don't think it's misogynistic what he's saying. He doesn't sound at all as if he's a hater of women or wanting to keep women down or stop them from fulfilling God's call on their life. So it's an interesting subject. We have time for a quick phone call. Keith in Michigan. Hey, thanks for calling the show today.
Hi. Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I love your talk with Dr. McFarland. That was really great.
Yeah, he's awesome.
You
Yes.
both hit it off great.
Yeah. He's wonderful.
Oh, yeah. Hey, one of the things that I've been married for 27 years, by the grace of God, and that I have learned, one of the things that I went to was a marriage conference back some years ago, Family Life, and there was one of the speakers in there commented, and you'll appreciate this because I come from an Army background, military background.
Yeah.
And the one guy said to the husbands, think of it as you're a private. He said, between the husband and wife, you're equal on the side of God, but somebody's got to be responsible. He said it's similar to a general going up to a band of privates that are just standing around, gaggling around, and a private says, the general says to one of the privates, I want you guys to all get together and do this feat, dig a hole, do whatever, and I'll be back in 3 hours, and I want the job done. Private. He's looking at one private. He's expecting that one person to get the job done. Now, everybody's the same rank. Everybody's doing has the same responsibility, except now this one guy has been directed by a general to get the job done. who's he going to look for or look at to make sure the job's done?
Him.
Not everybody. That
Yeah.
one private.
He basically elevated him to give him leadership. He's the leader of the privates. Yeah, absolutely.
So basically, that's what God is looking for us as husbands. Yes, we are equal in the sight of God between men and women. We're, He has died for us, for our sins, and so on and so forth. But He's expecting us to be leaders of our family.
So well put. That is a perfect analogy. Thank you for sharing that and for calling into the show today. And I just want to reiterate that, when we do things God's way, what He does is He blesses it. He promises us blessings and protection and a relationship and anointing. He promises those things if we're obedient. And so we always have better ideas for doing stuff. As humans, that's kind of a part of our innate thing. But in the end, it's God's way that works. All right. God bless you. Back with you tomorrow. Have a great evening.